This is a presentation of Welcome Molalla, where we bring you fun and informative videos from within our community. In today's episode, Steve Anderson, Chief Winemaker of the Eola Hills Legacy Estate Vineyard, talks about how soil conditions of the area affect the grapes and wine.
I'm Steve Anderson. I'm the winemaker for Eola Hills Wine Cellars, and we are at our Legacy Estate Vineyard just outside of Rickreall in the Eola Amity Hills. So if you are familiar with Eola Amity, it's about a 15-mile ridge of hills that runs north and south, and I'm on the south end, and the soils here, much like everywhere else, are very complex. So later you'll see many acres of vines, and maybe we'll show you the different colors and types of the soils. But the complexity of the soils are what make the grapes and the resulting wines interesting to me. So when I asked my vineyard manager to bring me samples of the grapes prior to harvest, I am designating different blocks. And sometimes those blocks, as I mentioned, not because of different clones, but also because of the soil types. So as we range from the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill and from one side to the other, as those soil types change, the flavors in the grapes are what are important to me. So I will ask for a different block to be sampled, and then as I determine when it needs to be picked, I will designate those. So I'm considering grape type, Pinot Noir, clone, Pommard, Vansville, Dijon clones, but then also the soil type. So a block that comes from the Jory series, which is one of the most recognized soil types for growing grapes here in Oregon. Maybe some Nicaea, which is lower on the hill than the Jory. And then I also have here at this site, and I will talk about it later, some marine sedimentary layers. So a lot of sandstone, you can find fossilized clams and snails, maybe even a few leaves if you're careful when you're searching for those. But more importantly, it's pH and mineral content. So the Jory series, very acidic, maybe about 5.6 pH. The marine sedimentary are 5.8. That is a big swing for me. And so depending on the style of wine I'm making, that's why we decided what grapes to plant and where based on those soil types. So it's very complex. So behind me you'll see the hillside, the Eola Amity Hills. This is important. At the top we have really red clayey soils. That's that Jory series. As we come down, as those soils decomposed and mixed up with the underlying soil types, we have colluvium. And so we have Jory, Nicaea on the far side where the spring has eroded all the topsoil and exposed just a pure marine sedimentary layer. That is key to where we planted what and why, and then I make different types of wine. So this is an example of that marine sedimentary layer that I was talking about. You'll notice the shells in here. So we have some imprints of the shells where the shell has gone away and it's just left the impression. Here's still a little bit of the original shell material. I'm not exactly sure, but you see how red it is. So that's kind of been stained by the water that is leached through the marine layer, and that iron has then deposited right here where that shell is and bound up there. So as you crack open these shells, there's these rocks, you can find these. My favorite are to find little snails. You can still see sometimes the actual shell itself, and then sometimes you just see this corkscrew where the shell has left behind what once was the actual snail without the shell. So it's really cool to look for these and find these. I'm often asked, so why is the fossil block special, or why is Jory special? They're all special, and they all have their own unique characteristics. So it's about the chemistry. I had mentioned a moment ago about the difference in pH, 5.6 to 5.8. It doesn't sound like a big swing on a number line, but in pH and the available electrons and how that affects the different mineral uptakes. So depending on where the acid is, you're going to get more magnesium and less potassium, or more potassium, less magnesium from the soil. And so if you were to have an aerial shot of this vineyard, you could see the different hues of green in the vineyard as it goes up and over the hill and the swale, and a lot has to do with the soil. So you can kind of look at an overhead aerial photo of a vineyard that's on a hillside, if it's a large enough block, and you can just tell what the soil type is underneath by the color of green in the vineyard. Now, granted, you're not really going to know the soil type. You have to walk up there and physically touch it, but you can tell where the transition is where I'm saying. So fossil block, because it has a pH of 5.8, it's less acidic. the grapes are a little less acidic. And that's important to me, especially say for my sparkling wine, which we pick at a really high acid and a really low sugar, so that we're able to actually sparkle the wine. But because the pH is different over there, I actually have a little less acidity than if I'm picking fruit 200 feet away in a different soil type. So we're at the top of our vineyard, Legacy Estate Vineyard, and this is about 750 feet above sea level. Unfortunately, you can't see at this moment what I'm viewing out here, but what we have behind me, I'm going to move around, is the Pacific Coast Range. And that is a mountain range that keeps us from getting the cold, driving wet winds off the Pacific Ocean. So in the evening, as the sun sets, all the latent heat in the ground rises straight up to outer space. And as it does that, it's trying to suck in the cold air from the ocean, but it can't because of that coast range. That protects us. However, the Eola Hills sits 90 degrees juxtaposed to the Van Duzer corridor, the lowest point in the coast range. So those two in conjunction with each other is what makes the Eola Amity Hills so special. And I would say especially the western side of it, because that's where my vineyards are. So as you're sitting out here enjoying the sunset and you're feeling the breeze coming in off the coast, you'll notice the marine push. I hear about it every night on the evening news. It's too bad we don't have an Eola Hills weather cam. Maybe someday we will. But if you're looking at the coast range, you see all these white billowy clouds and you think, oh my gosh, the clouds are going to come and it's going to be all rainy. But as soon as the sun sets and there's no more heat rising to outer space, those clouds just slough back off and head back out over to the coast. But if you look at the Van Duzer corridor, you'll see this finger of clouds coming at you slowly. You think, oh, it's going to get us, it's going to get us. And then eventually it just quickly goes back to, it's really exciting. I mean, it takes a couple hours to watch this whole phenomenon. But the Eola Hills derives its name from Aeolus, the Greek god of wind. So every day, about 4 o'clock, the winds kick up. And why is that important? Well, the winds help keep the vines dry, the moisture content low, plus it cools us off earlier than anywhere else in the valley, which helps us preserve the acidity in the fruit in the grapes, which gives us fruitiness, helps develop color from the skins, plus that mechanical action of the vines moving, it thickens up the leaves as a protection so that they don't desiccate. And then also the grapes moving, the skins also get thick. All the color in wine comes from the skins. So grapes just sitting there not moving aren't as good as grapes, getting some exercise and getting, thick, strong skins. All right, so I've moved to the far end of our Legacy Estate Vineyard, and so behind me you'll see the fossil block. And you may notice behind there's some oak trees, and then above that, higher on the hill, the Douglas fir. So my soil expert tells me that it's that marine layer that has a lot of limestone in it that supports, or oaks will grow in that, where Douglas firs don't. And so that is something new that I learned today. So I'm gonna swing around over to this hillside cut, and I wanna show you. Before we were looking at the soil and it was really red. This soil here is brown, kind of grayish brown, and you'll see in the hillside it has these stones in it, quite literally just bits of what I was calling sandstone, but I'm now told that there's a lot of lime in here, and that is from all the decomposed shells and maybe possible corals from 30 million years ago. But as you break open these stones, you can see here's a little patina of red. That's from the overlying basalts. As they decompose, that iron in the water finds the cracks in the stones and then it deposits on there. And here you'll see an impression of a clam on this one. Not quite as dramatic as the one I showed you earlier.
The light-colored soil in the wineries derived from marine sediments laid down approximately 24 million years ago. This was a time before the entire Willamette Valley and Coast Range was formed and was still underwater. The coastline in those days was in the Molalla and Scotts Mills region. Thank you for spending time with Welcome Molalla. We hope you enjoyed this episode and that you will come back for more and share with your friends.